Gotcha. Okay, all join in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. All right, we're first up. We have Joseph Mahoney, Senior Assistant County Attorney, Eric Denengi, Commissioner of the Public Works, Robert Gray, the Deputy Commissioner, EF&S, Anthony Griffin, Principal Sanitary Engineer, Department of Public Works, and Mary Beth Bianconi, Partner, Delaware Engineering. If you guys could come on up, I don't know if we need some more room. Oh, roll call. Sorry.
Emo?
Here.
Benelli? Here. Cheney?
Here.
Ellers?
Here.
Rico? Two.
Here.
Present one. I'm not sure exactly.
It's like the Academy Award. It's like eight. Very good.
It's nice to see you.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah. I can sit where I'm just.
Okay, Mary Beth, you have your hand up. Do you want to start up first?
Joe?
Or Joe?
Who's going first? Okay. So-
First is the update for the timeline. I think Mary Beth actually has
Some longevity.
that in her memo that she just passed out to us.
Yep.
So, most of you, I think, have met me virtually, if not in person. Like, I don't know if we've ever been in the same room together.
Virtual.
But I'm Mary Beth Bianconi from Delaware Engineering. We've been working with the county now for a number of years on preparing the wastewater treatment plant, on its existing condition to extend its useful life, on regulatory issues, and on the potential expansion of the wastewater treatment plant. Now, I was asked to provide an update where we are kind of overall in the process of those three things. So the front page of this memo just kind of explains the different aspects of this and explains how they work together. And then the second page is a little schedule. So I'll kind of walk through this a little bit and we can talk about this. Folks may remember that we published a draft facility plan back, I believe it was in 2016, that evaluated longevity improvements to the treatment plant as well as the potential to expand the plant from 6 million gallons a day to 9 million gallons a day. At the time, the county was still negotiating its speedies permit that hadn't been issued yet. So there was some question regarding some of the regulatory aspects of the project. The county spent a couple of years with the DEC, and in 2020, in March of 2020, a new speedies permit was issued for this wastewater treatment plant for the 6 million gallons a day that it currently is permitted to treat. That speedies permit does include a number of different parameters, some of which have already been met by the plant, some of which would be met in improvements that would be made, and then some that are costly to meet, including the treatment of total dissolved solids, TDS, and chloride. At the same time, in order to evaluate what should be done with the treatment plant, the county initiated the SECR process. That's the State Environmental Quality Review Act. That's to evaluate existing conditions, a project's potential impacts and mitigation measures. And the county issued a positive declaration, which means an environmental impact statement will be prepared. And the county is the lead agency for that work. Scoping was conducted. So scoping you can think of as kind of a glorified table of contents for the work that goes into the EIS. And we've been working on the EIS. The facility plan is being updated to include additional alternatives to the ones that were originally looked at. These include treating for TDS and chloride. They also include expanding the plant beyond 9 million gallons a day and the utilization of different technologies. Those alternatives that will be in the facility plan will also be in the environmental impact statement. So those are tied together. Once the seeker process is completed and the final facility plan is done, then an application for a new speedies permit can be submitted. To submit an application for a permit, you have to have an engineering report. So the facility plan will act in that capacity. And part of the speedies process of issuing a permit is to conduct seeker. So these things are all kind of tied together. So that new speedies permit will be to request both changes to the processes that are on site, because that's covered by the permit, as well as expanding the capacity of the treatment plant to treat wastewater. Once that's all done, then we can start the hunt for grants and low-cost financing. I know folks may be aware that yesterday the governor announced the 2021 water, they're called WIA grants, Water Infrastructure Improvement Act grants. Those were applied for in 2021. Traditionally, they are awarded long before now. We're not sure what the delay was, but in order to apply for most grants and financing for wastewater projects, a number of requirements have to be met. One of them is that you need an engineering report. In this case, it would be a facility plan. There's some required forms, paperwork that will go along with that. Seeker has to be conducted, which we're in the process of doing right now. Sign off from the State Historic Preservation Office is required for most grants and to even apply. You guys are a county sewer district, so there is a section of county law that applies when you want to, it's called increase and improve facilities. So there's a proceeding that Joe's office will lead the county through. And then most of these grants require that this county have some showing that it has a way, because the grants are not 100%. They pay for a portion of the project, but the county shows it has some way to fund the balance of costs. For most processes, that's a bond resolution. So those are all required in order to submit an application for, say, the funding that was just announced yesterday. We're very familiar with that program. Yesterday, we were pleased to announce to 8 of our communities that they received a little over $21.5 million of grants. So we're really familiar with the program. We know what's required, work with the people pretty much continuously. So that's kind of big picture overview. The second page, which is on the back of the first one, is just kind of 3 topics. Walk through those really quickly in terms of time frame. And I do note that I have a typographical error on here that I just want to clarify for folks. Anytime to change it before I make copies, and I failed to do that. For final facility plan, so what's the status? We need to update the flow information that we evaluate. We normally evaluate between 3 and 5 years of flow information. The draft facility plan did that, but that flow information was from 2012 to 2015 or something along those lines. We need to update that flow information. We'll need to escalate the cost estimates that were in that draft facility plan. We need to incorporate the new alternatives for review. Those include treating for total dissolved solids and chlorides, but more importantly, an alternative to expand the plant beyond 9 MGD if that's a decision that the county wishes to undertake. And so we'll be providing new recommendations. We're in the process of doing this work right now. We should have a presentation of those alternatives to targeting for this group in July. So that's coming up in just a couple of months. And then the typographical error is that the final facility plan should not say 12 of 22, it should say 9 of 22, September of 2022. I do apologize there for that mistake. Draft environmental impact statement. We have many of the sections of this work done. We are working on the alternatives section, and those are the same alternatives that we just discussed for the facility plan. They really look at the same thing. So that is ongoing. And again, similar dates target the alternatives discussion in July, the draft environmental impact statement finished in September. And there's a couple more steps to close out the seeker process. Final environmental impact statement and something called findings, which is the very end of the process, would be targeted for December. Then lastly, I know folks are aware, as part of this process, we did submit an application for variance from the water quality standards for total dissolved solids and chloride. That variance application is for the current plant and the current permit. So it's for 6 MGD. It's for the current project. We've submitted that application. DEC has responded with a list of questions and requirements for additional information. We're in the process of accumulating that information. There's some, sort of technical details in here about that process, but enough to say that the data gathering process is going to continue through the summer, and we'll have those results in the late summer, and then they will be consolidated into a response to the variance in September, which will conveniently coincide with when the facility plan will be finished and the draft environmental impact statement will be done. And again, these things all need to kind of be coordinated together, because as you can tell, it's like a web. They're really connected. The last page is just a little brief history for new friends who may not be aware of kind of what we've been doing for the last couple of years. I won't go into that, but I think that.
Yeah, can you maybe just explain where the next variance application would come into play for the expansion of the plant, timing of the process?
That's a great question. So to get a variance, so the Speedy's permit permits you to do something. There's a regulation out there in the world that says that you can't discharge water, without a permit, right? So we have this treatment plant, it discharges water to the environment, we need a permit. So right now, the permit that we have is for 6 million gallons a day for the Harriman treatment plant as it sits. The variance that we've submitted is for that, because the current Speedy's permit that was issued in March of 2020 says that we have to comply with those solids and chloride. And just quickly, I know a lot of people have heard this, our current plant does not have the technology in place to do that. The technology that would be required is costly, and that's an understatement in terms of the capital cost to build it is costly. The operational cost is immense. You're essentially running a desalination plant on the end of your sewer. So you can think about like over in the Middle East, most of our water comes from desalination facilities. You would be putting a desalination plant on the back end of your wastewater treatment. So it's expensive. So in order to get a variance, you have to be conducting an activity from which you want the variance to be issued. So the variance for a larger plant, say a 9 MGD plant or a bigger plant, would occur after you have a permit in place to actually conduct that activity. You can't ask for a variance for something that you're not already permitted to do. Does that make sense? You should be permitted to do it, then you have to say, but I can't do this part. Here are the reasons why. Give me relief from doing this part. So to put these kind of train cars in order, we submitted the variance application for the 6 million gallon a day facility kind of as part of our runway towards that future request for a variance for a larger plant. That would happen after we've submitted a Speedy's permit application.
Legislator Benelli.
Where are we with the variance that has already been processed? I mean, it seems like forever ago that we did this. And if this is the way things are gonna happen, and we're gonna go for another variance, what is our likelihood of getting anywhere near getting this project started? I mean, that's very concerning to me. I never understood that there was a second variance that we would have to go through, and we're still sitting here for the first one. Do we have any idea? Are we close? Because I know it was kind of debatable as to whether we would even get it.
So in the, we submitted the application intentionally with what we call the minimum amount of information required. Because the only other variance in the state is for mercury. And it is a blanket variance across the entire state. So we are having, while DEC has a regulation in their code of rules and regulations in place for variances, they've never done this before. So what we didn't want to do was spend a lot of time and money guessing at what they might want. We said, let's get an application in and let them tell us what they want. So that's what they've done. We sent in an application in, they told us what they want. Now we're in the process of gathering that information. Some of that information we have. It's under the control of the county. It's because we're a county sewer district and they asked us for a bunch of information about our plant and about the way that our regulations work, the way, how do we regulate users, those kinds of things. All of those things we have. But a bunch of the information they asked us about requires that we work with our local water suppliers. Because if you think about it, the wastewater, the water that gets to the wastewater treatment plant comes from people's homes and businesses, and that water in the homes and businesses comes from our local water suppliers. County sewer district is not a water supplier. Meanwhile, we have a lot of local water suppliers. There are many, because many of the towns have water supplies, villages have water supplies, and then DEC further requested, not just, okay, the town of water supply, but they said, let's say there's a town that has 10 water sources that generate water that go into the homes and businesses that eventually end up at the wastewater treatment plant. The DEC asked us to go sample those 10 water sources to obtain information about what's in that water when it comes out of the ground. Because most of these are wells. So what's in that water when it comes out of the ground, what's in the water after it's gone through the water treatment process to make it potable, so it's drinkable so people get sick, those kinds of things. Then sample it again as it comes into the wastewater treatment plant, then sample it again as it goes out of the wastewater treatment plant. Because total dissolved solids, chloride is a component of total dissolved solid. Chloride is man-made. We put chloride into the environment. So one of the obvious ones is road salt. We know about that one, that one's kind of obvious. But one of the other ones that we are looking at is a lot of people in this community have hard water. So the drinking water that comes out of the ground is really hard. So in order for people to not have to replace their faucets and their hot water heaters continuously, everyone has a water softener. So when we're doing that, what's the water coming out of the ground? That's probably, if there's chloride in that, that's probably coming from things like road salt, some other things, right? The water treatment process itself actually adds chloride, because one of the things that we do in water treatment processes is we use chlorine to kill bacteria so people get sick. That has total dissolved solids and chlorides in it. So what's our starting point? What are we adding by treating the water so it doesn't make people sick? Then what are people in their households adding to the water? So softeners, soaps, lots of things have total dissolved solids in them. So now we're adding that. Then we're bringing it to the wastewater treatment plant. So what do they get delivered to the wastewater treatment plant? And then in our process, because we add chemicals to it to, again, clean up the water so that we're not polluting the environment. So we add chemicals to it. So there's another addition. So the DEC has asked us to explore cradle to grave, the water that we're talking about, the disposition of in the environment. That's a pretty detailed process. And we're in the process of doing that right now.
We are.
Yes. Yep.
How far are we in that process?
So the little list here, we have to get something called a QAP, which is a Quality Assurance Project Plan approved by the DEC. We're in that process right now. That will also, and this is a little bit of a side discussion, I think on one of our most recent phone calls, we talked about the 303D list, which is the state's list of impaired water bodies. The county has amassed over the years hundreds, if not thousands, of data points regarding all kinds of things in the catchment area of the sewer plant and in the Ramapo River. I know much the frustration of a lot of the work of the county, much of that data has not been considered by the state as the state considers regulations, and it's very frustrating. And one of the reasons it's not been considered is because the collection of the data was not done under one of these approved plans. So we're trying to kill two birds with one stone. We're trying to respond to the variance and accumulate data that will help our argument regarding the 303D list. So we want our data acquisition process to be covered by a quality assurance project plan that's been approved by the state. So that all the data that we get, not only can we use it in our EIS and in our variance application, but the state, we can also use it to push the state along to say, move along with creating this TMDL, total maximum daily load for the Ramapo, which would also give us regulatory relief. So a lot of strings, but we have that process happening right now. As soon as we get that process approved, which right now we're hoping to have that done May, June timeframe, Then we coordinate with the water suppliers, and again, there's a lot of them. So
That's my final question, is how much are we basically collaborating with the municipalities?
So we've done extensive outreach with them. We talked to all of the water suppliers. They are aware that the county is going to be facilitating all of this. There's no cost to the water suppliers to do this. It's simply sort of a coordination effort for access and those kinds of things. So we kind of have that all queued up.
So
Everybody's
that's all
ready
in
to go.
place and ready to, in theory, go.
Right, so then it'll be just to say, okay, when are we doing samples? Is it Tuesday, is it Thursday? You know, was your operator there? Again, a lot of these, there's a lot of, because we're looking at raw water. So there's a lot of like, go to a location and take a sample here and take a sample there and take a sample here. And there's lots of, you know, what little bottle is being used and does it go in a cooler and filling out forms and, you know, those kinds of things. So we'll conduct the sampling. The sampling will actually go pretty quickly once we get to that point. And then we send the samples off to the lab. The lab does take some time, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, something like that. Because unfortunately, total dissolved solids is one of those tests that takes a bit for them to do. They get the data back to us, and then it's really going to be putting the data in a format to send in, you know, to show.
Katie, you have,
Just one final, so looking at the time frame to do all of this sampling, which seems extremely cumbersome. This timeline that you just outlined, that's taking all of that into consideration.
Yeah, Delaware's actually been on point with this in terms of communicating with the municipality.
Okay.
Mary Beth, with, I know a couple months back, Bob and myself reaching out to municipalities that had gotten back to you. Has every municipality gotten back to you now?
I believe, we were looking for 2 different pieces of information there, and I
Yeah.
believe everyone has gotten back to us at this point, or at least everyone that we needed to get back to us. The 2 pieces of information, one was this coordination with water suppliers, that was one. And then the second piece was asking communities to give us some predictive information regarding their future demands for sewers.
And I know some of them kicked it back and said that the county should have that information, and the health department, they were giving pushback. And that's what I had heard. Is there any kind of roadblock with that now, or? are we
Well,
getting
so-
that information?
You know, we have what we have. So what we asked people to do is get out a crystal ball. And that can be kind of hard, to get out a crystal ball,
Oh.
right? So the information that, say, the county would have, or the Department of Health would have, is, you know, Eric's a developer, he owns 300 acres of land, he's gonna build 600 housing units, he's gone through the process, and his 600 housing units are out there, and the world getting a sewer approval, or getting drinking water, or whatever, and so that's the stuff we know about. So that stuff is easy to get, because we can call Department of Health, they're incredibly helpful. County Department of Health is spectacularly helpful. We talk to municipal, say, planning boards, we can get all their information. That stuff, no problem, got that. It's the beyond the things you know today, because remember, we're building a sewer plant not for tomorrow, for, you know, just tomorrow. We're building a sewer plant that's going to ideally last for 20 or 30 years. It's a really long time. So we were asking for some visioning, you know, some, you know, it's your community, you know, your land base, you know, your zoning, you know your local development opportunities, you know whether you're a bedroom community, so you're a lot residential, or are you more commercial community? So that's really what we were asking the communities for. Kirsch Joel provided a very, very, very detailed analysis of that, going out some 20 years with stages and phasing, and it was very, very helpful. We used that actually as the model that we shared with others to say, now, you know, these guys do very detailed planning. We don't expect every community to do this level of planning, but anything you can give us that kind of gets towards this idea of in 10 years, we think we'll have XYZ number of new housing units or square feet of commercial space is helpful. We did get some of that information back from some of the communities, and some of the communities said, you know, we don't have this level of planning information. So that's okay. They can't make up something they don't have. We'll apply some planning factors in terms of what we could
Because I know
project.
about 2 or 3 years ago, we asked them all about, you know, what was a gut feeling?
Mhm.
And they've got numbers from all of them. And now they're saying that they don't have an idea, but I mean, for instance, Mayor Medina's predecessor, Steve Welly, you know, his unofficial number was 40,000 gallons a day, based on the fact that they're almost built out, and that the big chunk of land in Harriman is a federal waste dump that you can't do anything on. So, you know, I would say that, how many do you think out of the communities in the district said that we don't have any idea? And you have kind of formulas that you can build in, but I mean, how would you know either?
Yeah, so what we'll do, and really Tracy, who I know
Yeah.
some of you have met, she really was kind of spearheading this data, so she kind of has this all right at the tips of her fingers. She's in the field today,
Yep.
so she's not with us, but what we'll do after we have the data that we can get, we have obviously access to GIS data. So geographic information systems, we can look at real property information. What's the land use for various properties? We can obviously put the sewer, where are the sewer pipes? So we're not worried about places where they're maybe really, really, really far away. It would take a lot to get there, you know, but stuff that's adjacent to where there's sewers today. We would look at what is the land use. If it says it's 100 acres of vacant land, then we'll pop on top of it things like wetlands, things like endangered species, the kind of stuff that prevents you from building or reduces the scale of building, and we apply some factors. That's about the best that we can do. It's very difficult for us. You know, we can always look at existing things like existing zoning to the extent that it's available, but zoning laws change.
Yeah.
And so that makes it difficult. We can't, if something's zoned one way today, doesn't mean that, you know, 5 or 6 years from now, communities updates their comprehensive plan and then says, hey, you know, we really think we want to change the zoning either for more intense development or less intense development. So there's a little balance we have to have here. It's some science, obviously. We do some math and we'll have some things, but there's also a little bit of art to this in terms of, you know, trying to be predictive of the future. Generally speaking, in most cases, these predictions have a tendency to be pretty conservative. But you're a very, very high growth area, one of the highest growth areas, certainly in the region, if not the state, you know, and maybe even larger than that. And so that makes it hard. Like when you have really slow growing areas, it's relatively simple to figure out what the growth trajectory is. High growth areas, regardless of what's driving the growth. You know, if you go to Utica, there is no way 5 years ago that they could have told you they have 8,000 new people living in Utica. It's Griffiths Air Force Base. So, you know, in that completely have 8,000 new housing units. With 8,000, my nephew lives there and works at one of those tech businesses. There's no way they could have predicted that. They had no way of knowing that. So high growth is tough to handle. The other side of this, in terms of kind of how big is an expansion, there's also the technical side, right? There's just we have some things we have to do, right? So we have the existing plant that we have to keep operating. And we have to keep it operating even when we're building something new. So that means we can't just, you know, go out there and clear away all the stuff from 1978 or whatever and start all over again. We have to sequence things and build a little bit and then take a part down and do that kind of thing. So there's that kind of limits how big can you get. There's just simply how much land you have. You know, you have a fairly defined area. You may, you know, you could always evaluate additional land. That's a possibility, but we kind of deal in the world of we got to look at the things that we have. What we know is we have the Harriman site. So we're kind of staying in the confines of that site in terms of what we can build. And then we also look at technology and what can the technologies do? How can the technologies, we can create really, really clean water with some of these technologies, but there's still going to be a limitation in terms of just physically how much water can you get there through the pipes. You know, how much water can be processed in the site. So we're kind of coming at this from both the technical side and just sort of the practical physical realities of your site and the planning side.
And I think one of the alternatives is going to show that what is the maximum capacity of Harriman? What's the full build out, regardless of the studies?
Yeah.
How big can it possibly be with the technology?
Yeah.
So that doesn't change how we look
But
at
the
it.
technology recently went from 6 to 9 to now with the modular type of sequential batching, that time could go to 12 And that seemed to be what we were saying,
Right,
that
right.
could go to someday.
Yep.
And that could fit on the footprint. And, so these are all things that we kind of
July.
discussed before.
Yep, July, we'll have some more
Okay.
information on that. We'll have costs, which I will tell you, in case anybody didn't notice, costs have gone up a lot recently. So we'll be, taking that into consideration.
What was your preliminary estimate, just to go from 6 to 9, I put your number
We
a
did,
couple
it was,
months ago?
so the original number, I believe, was around between 50 and 60 million. It was somewhere in there. And about half of it was to extend the life of the existing facilities, because they're assets and we want to preserve them. And then the other half was to make the plant bigger.
So the half of the upgrades, we call it, so that will be spread among all users of the district, correct?
So that is, I think, a discussion that has to be had about like
Because I haven't
how,
heard anything about who's paying for what.
Right.
We go from 6 to 9, who's allocated for what, who's gonna pay for
Yep.
what, which district?
Yep.
That's what my constituents, because I represent Chester, and I know the people in Chester are very concerned that they still have allocation left, whereas other communities may not, so they don't think they should pay. And I don't think they should either.
yep, so that is part of this balancing act about how much bigger do you make this thing?
Right.
Because if you think about it, no matter what size we make it, right? We make it 9, we make it 12, we make it something bigger than what we use today. There's a carried cost associated with that, right? So there's the capital cost of building it that big. And then even if, so if we make it, say it's 6 million gallons today, but we're using just under 5, right? Something like that. So today we're carrying about 1 million gallons of capacity. The fees that everybody pay to maintain that 1 million gallons of capacity. Everybody's kind of sharing in that cost, right? So if we make it tomorrow, we go to 9 million gallons, we're still probably for some period only going to use 5 or 5.5 or something. So there's that space between. So that's got to be part of this discussion, is how does that get funded from a capital perspective and from a carried operating cost, right? So yeah, that's got to be part of this.
That's always been.
Hey, Peter,
Legislator Amo,
Thank
please.
no, I just, wanted to ask, yeah. I've been around the block a few times on this stuff, all the way back to 2000 when we were sued because we couldn't get something done and we got out of it. Because we were at the exact same point we're at now, and maybe worse, I don't know. And I think we have to be cautious that that's out there. I happen to be concerned. I think we might have cost us, what, 1.7 million or something if we didn't have an alternative back in 2002, whatever it was. But here's my question. As I sat on this committee for the few years, I've heard all you said. I came in looking for the numbers of dates, the changes, and you put them in. Thank you very much. And I see what you did. But my question is, do a little comparison for me on the gaps and the timelines you originally gave us and what we have now. It would seem to me that the stuff you gave us and I read and then kept a book at home, I didn't carry it around with me, we would have been all the way through most of this. We're not. Why not? And who's at fault? We just got through, and I'll tell you a bias I have, we just got through a deal with OTB where everybody told us it was the state's fault. We found that it wasn't the state's fault. It was some local management could have done a better job, and they wouldn't have the same problem they have now. So every time you say DEC problem, DEC, I go, that's sort of a big cloud that should make us all feel better. And I'm kind of worried. Tell me what you think our contributive cause to this delay is.
The only thing I can say is that we did, we have a lot of different things going on, lots of irons in the fire.
We as a committee or you?
I think the technical group, right? So all us, right? The technical side of this.
Okay,
We have, I think, 3 different things going on with DEC right now.
excuse me, I didn't hear you, 3 different,
3 different things happening with DEC. We have the technical stuff, and what I think happened was we all got focused on the variance and on trying to address the various requests that DEC made. They sent us their memo. We asked them for a meeting. It took a while to get a meeting because we wanted clarification before we went charging forward. So I think, you know, and I'm gonna, you know, let others talk here. I know from our perspective, we needed to focus on that and get our ducks in a row on that. And so I know that was one of the things that comes to my mind. I don't know if anybody wants to contribute anything else.
But as we were going through the whole process, one of the things that came about was this, like Mary Beth mentioned earlier, is the additional concentration or contaminant limits within our species permit, which is issued in March of 2020. That essentially for us began a new process of, okay, is it possible to even satisfy that criteria? Is it possible to get there? And these aren't simple questions. And your question begs to break it down to a simple answer. I'm not sure that is something I can give you. What it is a number of different variables that occurred during this entire process, and some of which were outside of our control, most of which were. And if it was up to me, why, you know, chloride and TDS is a drinking water standard.
Sure.
Yet we're still required to do it, and you know, we're facing. I think it was right on point earlier when she said the amount of money for reverse osmosis is absurd. We were talking millions, tens of millions a year, not for capital costs,
Sure.
but for operating costs.
I see what we're talking
I think the
about.
last number I heard was 16 million a year for operating.
Right, and that was 5-6
3
years
years
ago.
ago.
Sure. No,
So,
I understand it, and I'm sort of getting at it, you know, I'm a legislator, but I'm a retired guy, and I spent 30 years in healthcare management, and one of my major components was Joint Commission accreditation and all the QA stuff. And I'm hearing all this stuff that maybe we got a weak QA system here. You know, you should be predicting the kind of things the state is doing and where they're going and be ready for them. When you say that some of the sampling we did wasn't accepted because technical things went wrong, whoops, I'm sorry. You know, somebody should have seen that coming. Somebody should have seen it coming, and we should be big enough to say, okay, we made some mistakes, we gotta fix it. You know, this delay is critical because, you know, we're gonna get to a point in this process that, you know, we're just gonna cost us a lot of money in lawsuits if we don't put our foot on the gas. That's what I'm concerned about, and I know that there's problems with trying to predict growth, I appreciate that. But, you know, it's a home rule state, and that's our job. We don't have a control of what Harriman does. We have no control. We have to put it in a, you know, whether you use any statistical analysis, say I got a mean and a, you know, standard deviation above and below it, and I'm gonna see where I am. And I know if it goes, it's not gonna go up there, then that's where I'm gonna be targeting. You don't sit back and say, oh, I didn't know that was gonna grow. I mean, when we did the annexation for Carriage-Joel, it was so clear. We were projecting 30 million, 50 million, 80 million people. That's all documented by the consultants we had. If there's anybody else that's got data, but that data's there, and those data have been there for a long time. So to say, well, we didn't know about that, maybe I'm missing something, and I'm not being critical of it. I'm just saying, how do we move this thing forward? You know, because I mean, the question that I would ask and go to Joe is so I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know. I wasn't intimately involved in the last major one we had, 2002, or whatever that was. Is that we've got an agreement with the court. Once we hit 85% capacity to start working on improving it. How much tolerance will the court have when it says we've been working on it for 7 years and we haven't got it beyond the application for a variance? How much tolerance are they going to have to that? We signed it. What was our agreement? I'm worried. I think we need to move forward on it because there's a lot of things. Not only are people not getting capacity, but I think as a county, our job as a legislature, we got to look at why is this not moving forward? That's all. That's the basis of my question.
Didn't we make that declaration that we were at 85% when we restarted up the committee here?
Yeah.
Wasn't that when we were at 85? So that's 4 years ago, 3.5, 4 years ago.
But it was done before that.
So the state was notified that they were at 85% before that?
No.
That's
We
what I'm
had
speaking.
made that. We had made that. I think it was a resolution that.
That we were at 85?
And it was
When
approved,
we
of-
get to,
and it was approved of the courts at one point, and here we are.
But we got to it
We've got to get there.
a few years.
that was before the committee started.
That we
this
got to
committee
it.
started.
That we got to it.
No, not that we got to it, but that number was in place.
Didn't
prior
we
to
let
it.
the DEC know? I thought we did something to let them know that we were at 85%,
There are documentation submitted regularly to the DEC.
that we're at 85%. So
To
they-
demonstrate
because I remember
the
people
capacity of
saying,
the plant.
I remember hearing it.
Isn't that a standard requirement?
85% is not a DEC thing, that's a
That's
legislative
the
thing.
Oh, so
That's
it's-
what we
We
bring.
did on our own quite a while ago.
Because I can remember you saying that it looked, that if it looked, we were at 85% and then we were showing progress that we were moving along, that,
So
that would be taking into consideration that we're working.
Excuse me, but Peter, that's the question I was sort of asking Joe. You know, where's the tolerance? Yeah, we're moving along. We meet, you're doing a hell of a job. We're really trying to move along. But when somebody slams us with a lawsuit that said 6 years ago, 7 years ago, you said you needed to improve your capacity. And you've had all these elected officials working on it. And where is it? And what's the tolerance of the court? You're the expert in that. You told me I wasn't an expert in some of the stuff. Now you're an expert. Tell me what it is. Where's the tolerance of the court? And then what will they do with this?
Is that rhetorical? Okay.
I can't even spell it.
Pull out your crystal
What
ball.
the court will evaluate this as saying, what steps have you taken and are you moving forward with regards to the
Okay,
process? And I disagree with you. I disagree with a statement saying that there's some sort of a lag here. This is one of the most complex issues I've ever worked on. And I worked on some very complex things in my 20-some-odd-year career. But this, with the number of variables going in here, the answer is simple. But it
Getting
doesn't
there.
take into account the massive amount of work that's being done and has been done. It needs to get done. And I think right now we're on a good path to finalize the facility plan, to get the DEIS, which is already in the process of being completed. We're also performing additional alternative for the baseline project. We're looking at regional projects. We're evaluating them. At the same time, the DEIS the evaluation is being performed by Delaware.
sure.
So those are the steps that need to be in place. And this is not, DEIS is not something, especially for something of this caliber, it's not
I
something
understand, I
that
understand.
can be done in snap of a finger. I know you're not saying that, but
But Joe,
the
maybe,
fact of the matter is, we need to get to those points and we're striding. The
My
steps are
question-
being taken.
my question from the legislative seat and is that you heard Mary Beth tell us, well, we have a lot of other, fishes to fry here. We got a lot more pans on the burner, metaphor you want, right? And, and we're trying to get there, but we got other things happening. Well, will somebody raise their hand and say, legislature, will you give us 10 more staff? Will you give us so much more money so they can hire more people to do it? If it's that critical, we shouldn't say, well, it's a slow process because we got other things to do. If it's critical, let's hear how critical it is and how can we solve that? That's all I'm hearing. I'm saying, it's just so long, right? It's hard work, but how do we compress it? Compress it if we need more hands on deck, we compress it. What do we do?
Well,
I don't know.
like I said,
So
there's
I'm
steps that
frustrated
need
with
to
the
be
delay.
taken.
That's
And
what I'm saying.
I think we're well into where we need to be. I mean, DEIS, we're looking at an end date being provided. And that is, the evaluation
what?
is well beyond my knowledge. And that, from the DEIS, you have some steps to take after that is received and resolutions adopting it. Then you have your final environmental
Sure.
impact statement. then the
Public
finding statement.
hearings, we have public hearings. have to
And
do that.
then after that, that's when we move into, can we come in here and potentially request funding?
Are you all comfortable on that this timeline would be adhered to at this point in time?
I mean, Mary Beth provided the
I mean,
timeline.
obviously, you can't, as you said, crystal effect.
Right.
But we've been down this road many, many a time. So at this point in time, do you feel, and I know you mentioned that this is what's being presented today, do you see any other things and balls that are up in the air that need to be addressed that could have the potential of changing this timeline?
I do not.
Okay.
So, and I just want to clarify something. It is not that we don't have enough resources. We have 70 people. This is all we do. It's not that. It's that these things are all so tied together that you can advance a little bit on this one, then you have to come over to this one and do a little over here. you go back.
Yep.
These things are so tied together that you can't separate them and say, have a group of people work on this one, a group of people work on that one and do. They are all so connected. Like that question of, when can we submit a variance application for a bigger plant? It's connected to when are we going to know what that bigger plant is, which is connected to what is the evaluation of alternatives, which is connected to, are we gonna have to build a desalination plant on the back end of your sewer plant?
So you
Which
should
is
give us
connected
give us a
to-
big per chart.
So it's this giant, so it's not about, more people or more money or more, it's about the fact that there are so many little pieces. And that for each one of them, what we don't want to do, to your point, is waste time and resources chasing things that are not going to get us closer to the goal. So to some degree, we do what we can do, and then we wait for guidance and direction from those who at the end of the day are going to say yes or no. And since this is tied, if this was simply a matter of let's make a plant bigger, we do let's make a plant bigger all the time. It's the regulatory aspect of this that's challenging. It's the I think earlier today we were talking, and I can't remember which one of you guys said, we're going to, I think it was Anthony said, so we're going to evaluate the Harriman treatment plant as extending its useful life and adding capacity. And we're going to provide a bunch of different options for how to add that capacity as an action. And then separately, because the treatment of the total dissolved solids and chlorides is literally like an add-on. It wouldn't change anything that we would do. It's just another thing that has to happen. We're evaluating that. So that gives us flexibility. But again, we're working on the things we know. Make a plant bigger is relatively simple. If we have to make a plant bigger and we have to treat total dissolved solids and chlorides, it gets a lot more complicated. So that's our challenge, right? These things so it's not about needing more money or more people. It is about making sure that we aren't wasting time and money, chasing stuff down rabbit holes. It's not going to bring us any value. But making sure that we're going forward in the right fashion. And that again, the data that we were talking about was accumulated in the past. So let's make sure the data we accumulate going forward is the best data that we can get.
Legislative change.
DEC has been integral to the web that's been woven. And it seems we've been spending time waiting for them to give us some guidance and direction. And in the end, maybe it's come in bits and pieces, drips and drabs. I guess I wonder whether we need to rethink our strategy with DEC. I mean, if we were to walk in and say, lay on the table, here's the plant includes desalinization, there'd be no more questions from them. Shouldn't be any more questions from them because they're wrestling with the issue of whether they give us a variance or not. It just seems that maybe we're not moving forward as fast as we should be. I don't attribute it all to our ability to do that. I think the ability exists, but the whole back and forth with DEC seems to be complicating and extending the process. And if we could get them to give us better guidance and direction, that would facilitate our ability to move forward faster. Is there a way to make that happen?
I wish I knew. I'm not an expert. This is, I guess.
So here's the, you guys are our client, right? So we kind of do, we apply the technical stuff, but we do what you tell us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So far, the idea of doing a reverse osmosis system has been this, we have to evaluate it because it's a requirement of this process. But it has not been, we've not been directed by you guys, our client, to design a plant that expands Harriman and includes RO. If that's the direction, then
No, we definitely would not have given that direction.
Yeah, but you're not recommending that.
No, we're not.
Correct.
So
That's why we
why
haven't
would
done
tell
that.
you to do
No,
that?
That's why we haven't done it.
Will the facility plan address that specific question, the plan? In other words, you're saying this is gonna be the technology we're gonna use, this is the size it's gonna be, and reverse osmosis is ridiculous, get out of here, here's the package,
Yeah.
and wait for
It's
it
gonna
to come
prove
back.
out, it's gonna show why reverse osmosis is ridiculous.
Right.
Right.
Because we all just on hand.
So then
you know,
that's the
that's-
strategy.
It's listed as an alternative.
So-
And that's what.
It's
Exactly.
expected that we will have a decision on the variance
it is.
by time we get to the final facility plan.
Mhm.
At that time, if we have a variance, then there's an assumption that needs to be made is if we go from 6 to 9, will the variance, does the fact that we were issued a variance, does that demonstrate a likelihood of being issued a variance for 9 million gallons a day? We were issued a variance for 6 million gallons a day. Perhaps, but we're not getting guidance on that. That's, so if we go forward and we decide, let's go to 9 million gallons a day at Harriman, but the decision for variance was denied, then we have to look at other alternatives, which are again, part of what the massive undertaking that was done to address this very point is we need to have the information, and we may present ultimately, as just a random scenario, is we decide, the legislature decides to go to 9 million gallons a day. Submits a permit, then submits a variance is denied. Okay, then we need to step back again. Because we thought it would be, and reasonably assumed that it would be, but there's no way we can continue to discharge.
Right.
So that is just one of the many moving issues. That's putting aside the fact that the Ramapo River is going to be declared impaired.
That's the other part I was gonna bring up, that's changed since the last.
Right.
The big thing ultimately came out. One thing that we've been pushing for years is to try to get them to call impaired, and they just did that. Six months ago?
No, not even.
That's December.
Which is our benefit.
It is, but then kind of orders of how to proceed now, right? Kind of took.
Yeah, so, so that impairment, right, so what they've done is they've said that, I mean, it's a pretty wishy-washy process, it's really interesting. So they've said that they have every indication that it's impaired. But they, need more information. So that's one of the reasons why we want to make sure our data, so we wait for them to do data, it'll be 106 years.
Right.
So we want to make sure our data is something that we can shove on them and say, here, use this. We did you we've got the data under your program, we did you the favor.
That's the worst.
Right, exactly. So, the process to create a total maximum daily load. So I think, so we've got the Ramapo River watershed, which is actually a really small watershed, and that's kind of one of the issues that we're dealing with here is it's really small. They're gonna say, okay, so the water quality is impaired. Impaired means that the water body doesn't meet its highest and best use, its water quality. We have a B and C. So doesn't meet the B, which is non-contact recreation fishing, and it doesn't meet the C, which is just general, here's water, fishing, that kind of thing. So I'm gonna say what slice of the pie goes to all of the different contributors that are putting this contaminant, total dissolved solids, a subset of which is chloride, into the water body that's impairing its use. So that includes things like road salt. Who has control over that? Things like water softeners in people's houses that are not permitted by anybody because it's a water softener
Naturally.
in your house, right? So those kinds of things. So DEC
Industrial.
has to create industrial uses. So there's all of this stuff. So they have to say, okay, I've got this water body. It's got this much stuff that's contaminant in it. Now I've got to figure out what chunks of the pie are contributing to that. And then I'm going to go back and say, all right, how do I now recover the water body? Where is the best way to get rid of this contaminant source? We would argue it's back where it came from. Where did it come from in the first place? So not at the end of a pipe, because honestly, we can take it out at the end of the pipe all we want, and we can send trucks of brine to New Jersey lined up, and that's the cost, right? Is That's what a desal plant does, is it removes the salty part, creates a brine water that now has to be hauled off site to an enormous wastewater treatment plant where this is not an issue. So one that's like a 1 billion gallon a day wastewater treatment plant that dumps in the ocean. So you have tanker trucks leaving Harriman in a line to run this thing. We can do that all we want, but if it's still coming in at the source of contamination, wherever that is, be that road salt or water softeners or the drinking water supplies or whatever, we can pull out all we want. It's not gonna matter. If it's still coming in, we're just gonna continue pulling it out. That's our argument. So the other thing, and Barry, you know this as well, DEC does not tell us what to do, right? What they do is they say, here's your permit, Eric. You figure out how to comply and come back and tell us how you would like to comply. What is the measure you're going to use to comply? So we have said, and the premise of our environmental impact statement is we will comply with the water quality standard by getting a variance from the water quality standards. Because when you have a variance, literally the water quality standard does not apply to you. So we go back to our permit, the way that it was issued in 2020, but it does not have total dissolved solids and chloride requirement in it for us to be in there. It's going to say those words, but it's going to say this plant has a variance. That's exactly the way the mercury minimization program works. It's 50 milligrams, right? 50 micrograms per liter across the state. There's lots of places that don't make 50. There's a blanket variance. You're supposed to minimize. You come up with a plan to reduce. And that's something that we anticipate happening here, is that the state's going to say, okay, if you can't meet 250 and 500, what is your plan to minimize?
As
And
part of the
again,
variance.
as a sewer, we're the back end, right? We're not generating it, we're getting it. So our plan is going to say, we're going to ask for cooperation from where it's coming from. Road salt, hard water, water suppliers. It is less expensive to take it out in the first place than at the end. But again, a lot of our challenge here, and we went through this with the DEC, is that as a sewer district, our authority is very limited. We can tell you what you can flush down your toilet, but,
We're not gonna buddy watch them.
how, there's no such thing as the water softener police. That's tough.
Nice observation.
I think the water softener police. We call it the Culligan guy. Actually, we do that in a lot of communities. We call up whoever the local Culligan guy is and say, we know you can give us personal information, but just tell us, if I give you 5 streets, tell me how many water softeners you've installed. And it's a good indicator of what's going on. Just tell me, is it
This area.
There's
But
a
if
lot.
they're asking
Yes.
how are you gonna alleviate it? With the list of things you just said. Sounds like we're not gonna do away with water softeners, we're not gonna do away with those. So how do we alleviate it? It sounds like we're at a dead end right there as far as
Not
alleviating
necessarily.
any of that.
Well, it depends on what the testing and the evaluation shows. There's 2 arguments here. One is if it's man-made or what is naturally occurring. If it's naturally occurring, which I suspect it is, but take that with a grain of salt.
No pun intended.
Come on, that was good.
Bad.
Then
let yourself out.
our requirements, I suspect will be lessened. Our requirements to minimize, because that's the source is, we're pumping it. Well, it's being pumped with the contaminants. However, like Mary Beth explained, there's also needs an evaluation of from the pump, from the raw water to the inflow into the plant. What is increased? And that's where I like, it was on that avenue. That's where I think we'll need to reduce. That's where we have to look at. And again, it's right on point.
And how do you do it though?
The county only has the authority
Authority.
granted to it. Right? If the county's not granted authority, it doesn't have it. Same thing in the sewer district. If you not granted the authority, you don't have it.
Does DEC understand that? And appreciate it?
We'll find out.
We've had this argument a number of times.
So the strategy, I guess, is that we're moving ahead. We're expecting to have our final facility plan focus on of receiving a variance from DEC for TDS and chlorides. And so
Part of it,
There's-
part of it.
Part of it, yeah.
There's also a second part, which is regional, which is different,
Yeah.
different locations, different ideas, not Harem.
okay. But that's the TMDL issue, or not?
Well, or that would be like, look at if we say we decided to divide up our sewer system and send some of the wastewater to a different sewer plant in
Okay.
another watershed.
Right,
It's not in the roundabout. It's not constrained. There's obviously issues with that as well,
Yeah.
right? So this is one of those, it's a balancing of things, but we are going to run all of those things to ground again to bolster our argument. Because one of the things in the variance, there are standards for the issue of the variant, issuance of the variance, and one of those standards is this an undue burden? Is it ridiculous,
Yep.
right? Compared to the benefit that you get. So that's part of the reason why we are running all these things to ground, so that we don't simply get a denial to say, well, there's another way you could solve this problem. We are literally looking at every realistic way that we could solve this problem. And, all roads kind of point in one direction as far as we can see, but we're trying to be really objective. And that's why we really want a lot of data. We want a lot of, so that people can't poke holes and say, well, you just assumed this or you assumed that. I mean, I think we all sit here and say, a line of trucks from New Jersey carrying brine off some site here, is not, there's no planet on which that makes sense.
Eric may take a couple loads during the winter, right?
But we have to say, well, how many trucks and where would they go? And what's the carbon footprint of all those trucks? I mean, you're balancing things, right? So yeah, we might be preserving water quality, but what's the carbon footprint of 150 diesel trucks every 2 days driving from here to New Jersey? It's a push me, pull you kind of scenario. So we are running all of that stuff to ground. Tracy reached out to the treatment plant, actually got they won't give us an actual number for what treatment would cost until you actually propose something, but they gave her a range, so we'll use that. So there's that cost. We'll do a carbon footprint analysis on running this. An RO system, another thing about that is it uses an enormous amount of electricity. Where does your electricity come from? Is that coming from all green stuff, or is it a mixture of green and non-green? It's probably a mix. So we have to look at this really holistically to create the full range of evaluation, and really the argument about, yes, you're trying to meet this somewhat arbitrary number that, to Joe's point, is a drinking water standard in a river that no one drinks water from. Meanwhile, here's all of these other, the planning world, we call them externalities, right? So they're unintended consequences of an action. So you take an action, but by putting in an RO system, you are using more coal-fired power. You are generating this brine that has to be transported to another wastewater treatment plant. I mean, we could go really far down the rabbit hole and evaluate the environmental impacts of that wastewater treatment plant, because they're going to increase their, so we're not going to go that far, but there's obviously that implication there that you are simply, you may be moving, the puddle's here and it's a problem, you're just moving the puddle over there and now it's a problem. It might even be a bigger problem. So that's why it's so complex, right? That's why it's not, if this was just a straight out expansion, that would be delightful, right? It would actually be really simple to do. It's just really complicated to get through this process and to do it.
I get it. It sounds like it's mapped out really well. Potential roadblocks,
So approval,
and how can that affect the schedule?
so approval of the quality assurance project plan should be fairly straightforward.
I would think so.
DEC does that a lot.
Yeah.
They already, quality assurance project plan, which is basically like, what is the methodology that we use to do sampling? There's two parts to it. One is what literally EPA method are you going to use for the little bottles and the jars and this and that. That part's easy. What are you sampling? DEC already told us. So we're just using, you told us we need to sample these things. This is what we're sampling. So that should be pretty straightforward. Like we say, we've already communicated with the water providers. They were all on board once they understood how the process was going to work. So coordinating that. So I think that can go, as well as it can go. Sampling Getting it to the labs right now are taking 4 to 6 weeks to do this stuff. So we built 4 to 6 weeks into the schedule. We are continuing to work along on our parts of this. At this point, I think the only thing we are looking for from DEC will be approval of that quality assurance project plan. And I think we're off and running. But anybody, Bobby did this for years and years and years, so.
Yeah, just getting through without any review comments from the EC.
Review comments, yeah.
I really hope that happens. It's not my experience.
Never
No, they always say something.
That's one thing.
Yep.
The other is, to answer your question, what do we, and I think Katie brought it up as well, we have a draft EIS, right? That we're looking at between July and September of 22, say September. We need to have a public hearing on that. And then we're going right to an FEIS 1122. Well, we could get comments
Right.
that can create a lot of stuff that's going to take a lot more than a month or two to complete. Because the comments you receive need to be addressed and they form the final impact statement, okay? And that has to be deemed complete by the lead agency, which is you guys. Well, it may take more work than a month or two to do that, depending on what, this is something we can't control, right? So you asked before, I think Barry or Katie asked, what's out there that could
That's just.
derail us or create issues
That's
with
a very
that, okay?
important point.
So just keep that in mind, okay? And then a finding statement, that can all get real complicated or not. I mean, we had a public hearing for the scoping document, so hopefully we got all the comments.
Yeah.
But the studies we do and the presentation we do could create more comments.
Sure.
Right?
All right, I'm gonna.
That's an honest answer.
Katie, do you have a question?
Just as it relates to us and us doing whatever we possibly can, the timeliness of please coordinate with Barry to make sure that he gets that on the agenda to be able to facilitate that, so we don't lose any time
Sure.
on our end.
Yeah.
We're sitting here wanting action and then we delay it 30 days. That would be embarrassing.
Fourth Monday of the month.
Just
Bob
no
knows.
special meeting.
What Bob was saying,
Well, if we have to have a special meeting, we'll have, but let's try to
We'll
avoid
try not to do
that.
that.
obviously litigation, if a suit is commenced with regard to seeker, that would obviously, something that's outside our control.
Well, I was thinking between now where we are and finalizing the facility plan and the DEIS
So-
and getting the QAP done in the data.
That we can, it's other than just DEC, asking questions and we should be in a really good spot to respond to those, should be relatively quick. But you're right, at the end of the process, if we get a lot of questions on DEIS.
Yeah.
Then
But
would be one
again,
of them
we,
answered.
we've run that flag up the pole and,
Yeah, there's no,
they've poked holes in it.
right, it needed to be said.
Yeah,
That's a good
yeah,
point.
no,
That's a good point.
There's likely to be people coming out of the woodwork when they see some of the alternatives as well, thinking they might be a real alternative.
we may have people coming out of the woodwork saying, that's ridiculous, hauling, 15 tractor trailer loads of brine to Jersey City.
We agree.
Yeah.
I know there's people
They're
that
out there.
object to the Hudson River option, which we are still looking at as an alternative. The Hudson River option's in there, I'm sure comments about that.
Yeah.
We're gonna say, sending your waste someplace else, that's, and there's gonna be environmental objectives to that, objections to that, because it's an interbasin transfer, we're taking water from one basin and sending it to another,
That's
although
DEC again,
in
complicating their own
in Orange County,
confusion.
that happens, in the Lawrence Valley, that happens on a daily basis everywhere, so it's not a very strong argument, but it is out there. There's a backsliding argument to be made, and Joe and I have talked about that a lot. That someone could put in there as well, and all those things, to Bob's point, any question that's asked, we have to respond to it. A lot of the things, I think, with the extensive nature of the scope of work that we have, we're probably gonna have the information to
Yeah, I
respond.
agree with you, but
It's only
you
gonna
never know.
Yeah, the biggest thing would be, and I don't think we're gonna run into this here, but sometimes happens is, someone says, you need to do a habitat study for the tree toad, four-horned, whatever, and you can only do that in May, or whatever. you know, those kinds of things. We have run across a few of those. I have one right now where we are gonna have to do a freshwater mussel study for a wastewater treatment plant out following an oversink. We can only do that during 3 months of the year.
Okay,
Any trees we have to remove, they better come down when we can.
That's
No
good.
tree, what I was gonna say,
We gotta wait
what
until
kind of
November.
trees do we have?
trees.
No trees.
We're working on Harriman.
We have no trees
okay, I
there.
just have one more quick comment, then I'm gonna go to legislator Amo to wrap up this portion and move on to the other two. The other two will not be as long as a discussion, but this is a tight timeline. I'm glad to see we're back on track and we're moving towards it. If it takes 4 to 6 weeks to, let's say, 6 weeks for the testing of the samples, we're almost halfway to the beginning of the date, July. So I think we, and like Bob said, there could be, as you all said, there could be any kind of problems that pop up. So let's just stay focused, keep on that. You guys are doing it. Let's get the samples and keep plugging ahead. And with that, Michael Amo had one more comment.
Comment.
No? Okay.
Just one comment.
Is there anybody else have anything else to add to this portion for the timeline and all?
No, thank you.
No? Okay. With that being
Can
said,
I make
let's.
just a comment? Can I make a comment?
Sure.
Yeah, no, I just sort of turned the coin over. Like, let's assume for a moment, we're doing the most professional job we possibly can. We're the stars of the world. But all the hurdles that we're running into, and it's probably a question that can only be answered in executive session or some legal position, is it, at what point do we look at this and say, this, we're not doing this because it's an elective thing or a wish list. We're doing this because there's a gun to our head. We're doing this because we're told if we don't get capacity above the 85%, we could be in trouble with the courts. When do we look at this process and say all these hurdles and bumps in the road are getting in the way? We can't even do it. We got to look at something else. I don't know what we have to look at, but there's a legal question here. I can't, that's what I'm trying to get at when I asked you the question is, how tolerant will the courts be? This could be totally natural, as you're all saying, it could be, and it could end up being 2 or 3 years before we can get everybody to agree to everything. Would the courts be understanding of that if we ever get sued?
Well, maybe we need.
And how do we answer that question? I don't know.
Maybe for next month's meeting, we'll just meet with the committee and with Betsy, have an executive session to discuss legal, any kind of ramifications. And I'm asking if that sounds like something to do. These guys have their hands full, so if they're gonna do that, they don't have to be there for the executive.
That's an alternative.
And then we'll meet again in 2 months in person
With the group.
to see how you're going on the timeline. Will be a month or so.
You're very good.
And then we can discuss some other ramifications that could also be applied here.
I think that would be
Okay,
prudent. Because it is an outstanding question, but I don't think that any one of us are going to be able to answer. And we don't want to get into all the legality here this afternoon.
Yeah.
However, I think we'll have a better idea once we get into July and we're ready to go and we're still on track with this. If something happens and it diverts there, well, then there's, then there's more serious issue.
okay.
One thing you can't circumvent is the secret process. It's gotta happen.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
My 2 cents on that is that if we're presented with a legal issue, that us taking a month off may not be a good optic.
Okay. That's why I'm throwing it out here.
Just my thought,
Okay,
I
we
think
can meet and
we
see how
need,
we're
we
going
need
in the last full-
to stay on top of what's going on, so that we can't be
And we
accused
need
of
to
dereliction of
do an
duty.
executive session.
And
Well, I
yeah,
think he was going to have the meeting. He was just not going to have the whole, we were going to get asked.
well, it was only gonna be on, my understanding was it was only gonna be on
The
the
committee.
legal aspects of it, not the technical. And I think we need
Yeah.
to stay on top of the
Either
technical.
way.
Okay, so, all right, I'll reconsider that now and we'll meet next month.
Just to add to that a little bit, Joe, Anthony, and myself, we meet at least every 2 weeks, sometimes pulling in Mary Beth just to keep things going. Sometimes it's once a week.
Good, that's good to hear.
So there are other meetings going on with us,
Right,
just
okay.
to keep the ball.
So let's stay on track then. We'll meet
Peter,
the
I think
third Thursday.
Peter and I have discussed that.
Yeah, we talk very, very often also. And so we'll keep the meetings on track now. We'll meet again the third week of May. And if we need to go into executive session on that day, we can do that as well. Okay, Bob, can you handle item 1B, sewer meters update? I know this is quick.
Sure. We received a bid, a single bid for the 5 meters of approximately $700,000. That was in last week.
Yeah, last week,
Um,
14th.
We're budgeted for 450, I believe. We think internally that, and we've already started pricing this out, we think the best path for us is to put out a bid, buy the meters ourselves, and have our sewer road crew install these. And we can, we'll do it with our own staff and time. There might be some small electrical contracts or things like that that we already have contracts in place to cover small things like that. And I would say we could buy the equipment. Anthony and I have discussed it. Right now, probably south of $300,000 to buy the equipment. And then the installation, whatever that is, and we wouldn't even come anywhere. Well, my guess is we'd be 300,000 less than that $700,000 figure to do it.
That's correct.
So the breakdown of the costs in the proposal you did receive.
Yeah.
How much of it was for did it break it down to show you how much it was for the equipment?
Anthony.
And how much it was for the ongoing technical support to analyze and provide the data?
Yeah, you want to know what, from the bid results, what they were of the 700,000 or what we would?
No,
what we would be able to do it for.
what the bid was that came in.
Yeah, I mean,
Did it break it down that way?
it does. Furnishing and installing the meters was, for 5 meters was $440,000,
Which you figure you can do for 300.
which we figured we could do for around 300,000.
Does the 300, is that the 300 just for the meters?
That was furnish and install, you said, right?
Furnishing.
I
furnishing
think it was
and
Rob
installing.
saying they could probably buy them for 300,000.
And then have the
$100,000
work. Okay.
install,
Yeah.
so maybe 400,000.
And that might be in the best interest of the district. Yeah.
What else is on there?
And so the rest of it was,
Well, there's monthly maintenance fees, the contractor that would be putting it in that would have the contract with, it's $180,000. We can actually get
for over what period of time?
3 years.
So 60 a year.
Yeah.
Which
Correct.
is,
Yeah,
Five.
180 divided by 3 would be $60,000 a year for data hosting.
2,500 a month.
Right.
No, 5,000. Sorry.
And they'll still do the service.
He increased that cost. It's a pass-through cost from the vendor to the contractor. We can do it for $90,000, just, buying directly a plan from from the supplier itself.
Okay.
So there'd be a huge savings there. Now, all total, we're looking at about $300,000 in savings. And it would be within the current capital plan, capital project that we have, without having to ask for additional funds. If we were to go through with this bid, we would have to ask for an additional $300,000 of funds. approximately.
And so how much was in there for technical analysis of the data and, giving you the information?
Giving us the monthly reports, that's all part of the monthly maintenance and data hosting and reporting. It's for monthly reporting as well. That is included.
And who was the proposal from?
TAM Enterprises.
So they're not giving you really strong technical engineering evaluations of the project.
Of
Of
the data that comes in. I mean, there'll probably be, we can get it in like Excel format and do our own evaluation. The only thing that we'll probably end up getting from them would be monthly full reports, dailies and graphs.
And what type of meters are they?
They're from Dave Heiner. They're a laser technology meter, either ADS or I'm not sure exactly
So-
the brand name.
Um,
It's a laser probe.
Laser,
It's the latest
from the
technology.
top, from somewhere around the rim elevation, shoots the laser down and it measures the distance between the
Right.
water surface.
Right. And it measures the velocity as well. It's going to measure the depth of
Yep.
water as well as the velocity. So you have, area and velocity
And-
per flow.
And how does that meter react to surcharging?
It's fine because it has a pressure transducer in it as well. That works very well. We actually have a bunch of the same manufacturing products out there that we're using currently for measuring different areas, Curacao being one of the areas, and they work really extremely well.
Thank you.
So now would that fall into something that we need to work with, or is that between the county exec's office and
It's under the capital.
it's in the capital?
We would just do another bid. We would just put another RFP out.
Yeah, we don't need a separate authorization, we just wanted to have an open discussion.
Okay.
Decided it wasn't a good idea, and we wanted to switch.
Okay, and just moving on to Village of South Blooming Grove Chester Improvement Project. I know I haven't, I was gonna get added to the email list. I haven't seen any update on the email list, and now we're at the 20th. And it should be the first week in May.
First or the second. So, and that has not, that hasn't been firmed up yet, which week it is.
Was it supposed to be this week?
It was gonna be in February.
Oh, well,
It's
okay.
it's a moving thing.
And then was April
And there
4th.
was some repairs that had to be done on existing facilities
I
that
see.
kind of threw it. And in a way, the water's getting warmer, so, the problem will be more visible than being
So
in
that's a
freezing
good
cold
thing.
water in
That is-
February,
It's a better time to do it.
It might be a better time.
It's a bit more visible down in the airplane park too.
Exactly, where we're gonna have our meeting, right?
Yeah, well, we can have a meeting there one of these days.
Little field trip.
Just across the street.
All right, if anybody doesn't have anything else, the next meeting, I looked at the date, would be May 18th at 1:30 in the statutory committee room here. And I'll take a motion to adjourn. So moved. Second. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate all. Thank you very much.
I can.